Welcome back, everyone, to the Lift Our Voices platform podcast. Now, this is your host, Faith. And guys, for those of you who are returning back to our show, I would love to say a big welcome to you guys. And those of you who are just first time listener, we also want to welcome you just because we know that everything you hear here is going to make a big change and just something that if you come in and listen to our podcast and this platform, you're now part of the family that we're building here through storytelling. Today, our guest is somebody that we've been really excited to have on the show. She is somebody that we've been working, behind the scene, and sometimes life happens and things change, and there's been some change in the process. But you know what? What's mattered the most is that we have her on here today, and she's ready to go. So, with no further ado, let me go right into what we have here to set up to discuss for our listener today. Now, our guest here, she is joining us actually from Canada, so international. And just a little bit about her. She is an author, and she's a speaker. She's also somebody who has, an amazing story to share. But with that, she's also is a podcaster as well. So she's a fellow podcaster and a social change maker for abused women and just women in general. She's a huge advocate for that. So I'm excited to have her here today. Welcome, Miss Candice, to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, we're glad that you can make it, and we appreciate you being here.
Mm.
And so, really quick, I hope I didn't leave anything out of the
No,
introduction.
you hit all the high points for sure.
I know it's always different when you're interviewing a fellow podcaster. You're like, she knows what's going on. I got a big show on my A game and bring that.
Mm.
So, all right, awesome. So I want to ask to kind of, talk about just some of your life experiences and what
Mm-hmm.
you do to impact lives. But also because I know our topic today is very sensitive,
Mm-hmm.
and it's also very meaningful, and it's something that's important for all of us to learn about more because we're talking today about abuse and
Mm-hmm.
sexual abuse and trauma and things like that. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's and also suicide. That's
Yeah.
something that a lot of people um, it is people that are affected by it, but somehow it sometimes could be a taboo in our
Mm-hmm.
some of the society. So um, I want to also be able to give you guys some information based on what we're going to be talking about. So if you're somebody who's sensitive to sexual abuse and any type of trigger, we don't want you to feel like we're not going to let you know ahead of time, or even suicide. So for those of you who may be, if for every reason you know somebody who may be experiencing any of these topic today, as far as domestic violence and sexual abuse and suicidal, I want you guys to know that there are resources out there. So especially for women, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is something that is 24/7. It is something in the US that is very much accessible, confidential. So the number for that is 800 and then 7233. Or if you're somebody who would like to text, you can text directly, and it's going to be just text star START or to 88788. So that's another way to get some help. So let's get right into it. Um, Candice, I was surprised to hear that. I know you're based in Canada, and so I
Mm-hmm.
know there are different data for that demographic and where you are. But
Mm-hmm.
I want us to also kind of talk about the American demographic as well. So, because a lot of our listeners are based here in the US.
For sure.
And, and so there was something that was very interesting that I read about. And I read about this was on the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence website. And
Mm-hmm.
there's another website that's very, very important for people to know about. It's called the RAIN. So it stands for Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a nonprofit, been around for 29 years. So they said that 1 out of every 6 women has been a victim of sexual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge amount of number. That's a big
And the
number.
numbers are very similar in Canada. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want you to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that in Canada. How is it like there?
We're a lot more private up here, and so we're known to being very nice, and so we say thank you a lot, and we say I'm sorry a lot. And I think that that lends itself into, sort of an upbringing that set me up certainly for not knowing how to speak up.
Mm-hmm.
And I often talk about the fact that so I knew my abuser.
Mm-hmm.
He was actually my boyfriend, and I had a sense in my heart when he said he was going to come visit me. He wasn't from Canada; he was coming to visit from overseas,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a sense that there was a sense of fear. And I didn't know when I was 17 years old that that was something I should trust. We don't really talk about, trusting our feelings. We have Disney's version of, let your conscience be your guide, but we don't really dive into that, I think, in an empowering way for
Yes.
children, but certainly for women, because, as girls and women, we got to have this knowing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're not really taught to trust our emotions, right? We're taught to tame them. We're taught to hide them. We're taught many different things. And so I had a sense of that. And I often have said that one of the reasons I was abused by this certain gentleman is he was the first young man I had met who didn't know my
Mm-hmm.
dad or my uncle or my brother. He didn't have a connection where he would have been kind to me based on his relationship with these guys. And so it wasn't until that particular point, and I didn't know how to say to him, this makes me uncomfortable. Or if I did, it was always after the fact. And then there was always the apologies and the gaslighting and the manipulation. And, so it was subtle, but I didn't necessarily know how to, say, hey, peace out. This is not cool. And here's my boundary, because again, that's something that we just don't talk a lot about. But I did want to say, for your listener who heard those numbers that you shared, and thank you so much for sharing them at the beginning. Um, I called those kinds of numbers. I texted those kinds of numbers because I needed not just to talk about it, but I also needed the language to figure out how to get out.
Mm-hmm.
And so many women say, well, you don't know, and there's no way for me to leave. And honestly, once I left, not just that situation, but some of the other ones that happened later on in my life, the amount of resources are there.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that I met, going through it, was everybody, kind and non-judgmental? No. But more people were kind and non-judgmental than were the other way around. And to be honest, the one who was hardest on me in my leaving
Mm-hmm.
was me. But right down, to the suicide that, I considered, I got up off the floor, and I did call one of those numbers. And I said, I'm not on the floor anymore. I'm not going to hurt myself. I know why I'm doing this. I've got some abuse in my past and I haven't quite been able to figure it out. I didn't say that clear, quite that clearly, but um, I was shocked at how they were like, we're so glad you called. We're here to support you. What do you need? Do you need immediate help or do you need help tomorrow? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the woman that they introduced me to was my first experience of therapy.
Mm-hmm.
She was incredible. She has had such an impact on my life in terms of the books she recommended I read, in terms of some of the skills she gave me, journaling. Because, of course, in the, 7 or so sessions that they gave me, as part of the package for reaching out, um, we really couldn't go through all of it, right? You can't go through years of abuse and
Right.
find that peace. But the tools that she gave me certainly started me on a path to
Mm-hmm.
understanding who I was, embracing those things, and she was, beautiful. She was empowered. She was married. I'd never met a woman like that who had that much joy and abundance. And like, so I think, for the person who's maybe afraid to make those calls, I would really encourage you. And if you don't love the first person you meet who's there to help you, be committed to getting the support you need and figuring out what that means, whether you
Mm-hmm.
tell your whole story to that first person or whether it's something that you work on privately like I did in my journals. But there's a lot of support out there. And I just kind of want to throw that out there because I think I don't want a woman who's sitting there to not make that phone call that maybe could
Mm-hmm.
mean the difference for her.
That's very important that you said that,
Mm,
because I think sometimes it's this fear of, I feel I'm alone.
mm-hmm,
I don't feel like, I feel like there could be on
mm-hmm.
the other side of that, there
Yep.
could be the judgmental side of people, maybe they don't know
Yes.
the full story. And, like
Mm,
you said, like people wonder, why can't she get out? Why can you get out this? Or why didn't you
yes.
say something? Why didn't you say something when they happen? And I want to kind of talk
Mm-hmm,
a little bit about that with you.
mm-hmm.
Being that, it took you almost, I believe you said 20 years,
Yes.
um, you know, for you to actually be able to recognize that it was an assault and also to
Yes.
speak on it. So why do you think it took you so long to be having the courage to find that courage to speak out?
Because when it happened, my how I saw myself
Mm-hmm.
shattered. I set aside a lot of dreams. I didn't pursue things because I was dealing with anxiety post that.
Mm-hmm.
Many different things happened. And so I feel like there was a lot of grief that I needed to sort of look at, acknowledge, and feel, not
Yes.
just around the physical thing that happened, which is, challenging enough to work through, but also the regret and the grief of what didn't happen in my life because of that particular moment. It was like I was going one direction and
Mm-hmm.
then I made an entirely different direction. And I've always regretted and been sad that I didn't pursue some of those dreams. And so I think I really needed to come to a place where I wasn't making it, a G-rated story where, I said, well, I knew someone and he didn't respect my boundaries and he maybe touched me inappropriately. I was sort of glossed over it rather than when I finally, stood in front of the mirror
Mm-hmm.
and I said, by definition, you were sexually assaulted. That happened to
Mm.
you. And I kind of had to, sort of that radical responsibility idea, radical
Yes.
acceptance. It doesn't let the other person off the hook, but you can't, at least I think, you can't really move forward into healing or embracing some of those things unless you acknowledge this happened. It sucked. It's
Mm.
bad. It's not cool. It's all of these things. And so I sort of, by admitting that to myself, I finally gave myself permission to grieve it, to feel it, to acknowledge it. And I was terrified for years that if I went there,
Mm-hmm.
that the darkness would engulf me, that I wouldn't be able to get
Mm.
through it.
Right.
And what actually happened is I had the most profound feeling of relief. And then I acknowledged this changed me. It changed the course of my life. I
Mm.
have regret and sadness about that. And so again, it just sort of led to these things where I was finally being truthful with
Mm-hmm.
myself, which is where my podcast was born from, to trust the niggle, which I say is that annoying, inconvenient. For me, it was that fear or feeling that said something's not right here. We don't have a logical reason for that, but we should trust it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then to tell the truth. Now, the world doesn't always need your truth, ladies, right? Nobody necessarily needs to know if you don't want to tell them, but
That's true.
you deserve your truth.
Mm-hmm.
You deserve it. And what's really interesting, and this happened even the other day for me, is I was sharing an experience
Mm-hmm.
based on something that happened in my world. It was triggering. I saw something, it triggered me. And um, I felt, and this was a beautiful, loving person I was with, but they asked some questions that I said, hey, I actually don't have to defend what happened to me, how it affected me, or why I'm feeling triggered now. I'm acknowledging I'm triggered. I'm going to do what I need to get back to myself, all those kinds of things. And he was like, oh, I didn't even realize, I didn't think about it. And so sometimes I think a lot of people are well meaning, but they can make you feel like you have to defend it. And I just said, no, I don't have to defend. If I'm feeling triggered, if whether you would define what happened to me as sexual assault or not, that's actually not your call. It's
Mm.
mine,
Right.
right? Somebody insulted a sexual boundary and touched me in a way that was inappropriate for me. That's
Mm-hmm.
right? Done deal. And I don't have to defend how that made me feel.
Yeah. No, I definitely get it. I've been there myself, and everything you say resonated with me because as
Mhm.
somebody who also have been sexually abused,
Mhm.
it's just this it's this thing that never goes away. Like it's
No.
just it kind of just becomes such a
Mhm.
part of your life, and even though you
Yep.
don't want to admit it,
Yeah.
that it's that it is, it's
Yes.
causing you to react in different things and act different ways that you may
Mhm.
not would have been acting if
Yeah.
you didn't experience that, because that's violation is something that really it affects the soul, not just the
It does.
physical.
It
It
does.
affects the
Yep.
soul. So when you get violated in that way,
Mhm.
it's something that changes everything. Like you said, it changes everything in your life. Like you may have one way of moving or thinking of moving life, but then
Mhm.
once that emotions and that trauma comes back, and it's just because it's always there,
Yeah.
like you said, because sometimes you don't know how to express it, you don't know how to release it, you don't know, you take on the blame, the shame, you take on all of that.
Mhm.
And so I definitely know how that can be something that can be a hindrance sometimes. But I love that you mentioned therapy, because for me,
Mhm.
it wasn't until I actually started to go to therapy and then releasing some of these
Yes.
past trauma things, and I realized, oh wow, that was inappropriate. Like, and I started to put the dots together, like, oh man, I was abused. There wasn't consent here.
Right.
Um, you know,
Yeah.
even though it seemed like I was actually a participator, but
Hmm.
I wasn't participating. It was something that was done unbeknownst to me, and I just didn't
Yes.
have the voice to speak up. And I think, like
Yes.
you said, do you feel like growing up and having not having the ability to have like let me say this in a way like this. So with my culture growing up, we have a thing where it's like a child's growing up, they're seen but not heard. You know what I mean? So you're existing in society, but
Yeah.
you're not allowed to speak up, and you're just a child, so you don't grow up knowing how to build on your have a voice and how to have a voice and how to use that voice.
Hmm.
Do you think that's something that kind of contributed to yours as well?
Yeah. I was definitely raised to be a good girl. And I
Mm,
would even say a nice girl. And the etymology of the word nice is actually stupid. That's what it means when you break it down. Words have a funny way of changing, especially with the
mm,
times and cultures and stuff like that. And when I was aware of that, I was like, wow. My parents had a saying that it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice, which
mm.
as an idea, I loved growing
Right,
up.
right.
But I've changed it now that I know the etymology. And I'm like, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be kind. Because I think that's the intent of the saying. Because for me, by choosing to be nice,
Hmm.
I didn't want to make other people uncomfortable. My family is
Mm,
wonderful. They're well known in their
right.
community. They're very, very kind to a fault.
Hmm.
However, without boundaries, which I think, if I look at my dad and my grandpa, they had great boundaries. I think men are raised differently about boundaries than women
Yep.
are. But I was basically raised with the idea that, you save sex for marriage. It's a wonderful thing. The guy takes the lead. And so, but there wasn't necessarily this awareness of, hey, if somebody, touches you in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable, here is specific words that you can say. And
Mm,
even if they're making you feel bad about it, because we know that this is the thing, right? They say, at least mine said, things like to me, well, I've come all this way and I've waited this long for you and I love you so much. That is BS, ladies. And when they say that, that's when your hand goes up and go, no, 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 no. You are responsible for your feelings. But I had been raised to say, try to behave in a way that wouldn't, it's very conservative Christian. So the language around it was, don't make men sin. So unfortunately, I grew up with
mm,
this idea, not meaning it, right? They were well meaning,
right.
but I grew up thinking that there's something wrong with me because I'm beautiful. There's something wrong with my body and I have to hide it and shameful. And so to be honest, there was a pre-programming,
Hmm.
innocently programmed that set me up for somebody who knew that, understood that language, and then preyed upon it.
Hmm.
I knew I wasn't his first. I know I wasn't his last. And
Hmm.
I've often had to think about that. And I was like, when he came to town, I had never held a boy's hand. I was very focused on school. Um, I'd known young men, but they all knew my dad. And so they knew the boundaries, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And then I met somebody who held my hand, and that was exciting. And, those emotions and hormones are going to override a lot of that programming. But I can remember at some point thinking, I don't want this anymore. Like, where's the stop button? How do I
Right.
slow this puppy
The
down?
band. Yeah.
Right. And so I think, at least now I have a 7-year-old daughter, and it's a big deal for me to say, hey, even now I'm starting to program her to say, look, whether it's mommy or daddy or anybody else, if we're doing something and you feel uncomfortable, you have the right to say, I'm uncomfortable. This
Hmm.
isn't cool. Um, and she's like, even with you? And I said, absolutely.
Yes, it
Because
starts from home.
right,
Yeah.
it does. And then she can say, mommy, I'm uncomfortable by this. And I say, well, then let's talk about that. What makes you
Yeah.
uncomfortable? And she doesn't know that I'm still a mom, right? We can't run on the street without checking both ways, right? But at the end of the day, I want her to understand. And when that feeling goes off, this isn't cool for me, then
Hmm.
she stops.
Yes.
Because hopefully that, even if she goes a little too far one time, hopefully it won't be all the way like it was for
Hmm.
me.
Yeah, and that's such a good thing to teach them too. Like
Hmm.
that intuition, like
Hmm.
women have it. Like we're gifted with that,
Hmm.
that discernment. Like we're
Yes.
gifted with that to ability to know when something is not right or something is not. but
Yes.
we don't listen to it. Like you said, it's
No.
almost like you have to train yourself to know and
Yes.
listen to what, obviously not everything that our subconscious is telling us is going to be accurate, but we do have that sense in our mind and say
Mhm.
that feelings, like when you feel like, oh, this is not feeling like it's going anywhere good, I need to
I
stop
think
this.
one of the things that I've come to sort of realize, in
Hmm.
this as we're learning to listen, especially because women ask me all the time, well, how do I listen to it? And how do I know when it's not just
Yeah,
emotion or
exactly.
jealousy?
Hmm.
Give yourself the gift of time,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So even if you feel uncomfortable with whoever it is and you say, hey, can we slow this down?
Hmm.
You're going to know pretty much right away if they say, well, if they push for their agenda, they probably don't have your best interest at heart. If it's
Hmm.
somebody who really does care about you, even if his needs are no longer being met, he'll say something like, okay, I want to go forward, but are you uncomfortable? It's
Yes.
been my experience that, you know, would you keep pushing forward if you were uncomfortable? No. And so I remind women all the time, just give yourself the gift of time, because if he's really serious about you and he really wants to be with you,
Yeah,
one of the things that will be important to him is respecting your boundaries.
that's
That's
true.
just, I'm in an amazing relationship now.
Hmm.
And when I started it, I said, yo, here's my boundaries. Here's what's important to me. Here's my core values. And so our first 3 or 4 dates were not, movies or anything like that.
Mm-mm.
We literally brought our journals to the table. We opened them up to our core values and we talked about them.
Mm.
And so that's the kind of person. And I know there's a woman who's like, how do you meet that kind of guy? Well, here's the unfortunate thing. You don't attract what you want, you attract who you are.
Hmm.
So, if you're attracting guys who continue to prey on your vulnerabilities, you are attracting other wounded souls, and your woundedness completes their woundedness. And so, you've got to do some work on you. Dare to be alone, dare to fall in love with yourself, dare to start
Hmm.
telling the truth about hard things. Because I found this one when I was like, I need some time to just be me. And I happened to really be proud of me. I'd been making some tough decisions in my life. I had said, I want this kind of person. And the list felt like, does that guy actually exist? He does. He actually does. Is he perfect? Not even close. But I want to share that for people that it took me 20 years to find him. But I know I would have found him sooner if I had done the work
Mm.
to be the kind of person who could talk about my traumas openly. When he stumbles onto it and we get triggered or I get triggered by something he does, I don't blame him for that. I say, hey, I'm triggered. I need a minute.
Hmm.
I need to go for a walk. I need to, um, and to be honest, it's a really great gift to come into a relationship and not feel wounded. There's some
Hmm.
scars, but I'm happy to show them to you. And that's really neat as well. There's a sense
Yeah,
of relief when you can
that's
live your life in this kind of integrity.
that's right. That's beautiful said. When trauma is something that it's, I feel like, especially just abuse, like
Hmm.
sexual abuse, is something that can be, it's such a, it creates such a scar, a wound. And I was tell my husband, I said, there women that are being abused sexually
Hmm.
will carry this one with us, this scars, and
Hmm.
the people that we meet, and even what it be in your friendship, because there are friendships that can trigger certain traumas too. And so
Hmm.
friendships or emotional relationship, things like
Hmm.
that. Like
Hmm.
if you meet somebody who, like you say, who hasn't done their own work and is still
Hmm.
in their having their own, managing their own scar, then
Yeah.
we then can either be infesting each other wounds by the way
Yes.
we are acting, the way we're communicating, and then
Yeah.
or versus you can meet that person because you've done the work. You meet that person who is, you're able to then be that doctor in a way to help heal some of
Yeah.
their wound, maybe put some band-aid on there,
Exactly.
and I add like more things that's going to create more of that
Hmm.
reminder for them every time,
Hmm.
and that trigger. So really, I love when you talk to women and you talk about the important power in the
Hmm.
word no. That means two-letter, but it's so important. So I wanted to kind of explain a little bit, like, how did you come to learn the power of saying no and how that applies to you
Oh
today?
my gosh. Um, no is a magical word. It really is.
Yeah.
And I think my awareness of the power of no started because part of my career was in sales. And so a
Mm.
lot of times you hear a non-committal yes, which is basically you're saying yes, so they go away.
Yeah.
And so you're actually looking for the no. And so I
Mhm.
think that's when I got sort of started to this whole idea that when someone says no, that's when the negotiation really starts. So I think that's when relationships really start. When you run into somebody's boundary, you start to know who they are.
Mhm.
And so I started to realize that no, how do I put this? No opens up to the yeses. So when
Mm.
I have the courage to say no to you or the person who wants to take my time, which is the non-renewable resource, ladies, you can't get
Right.
time back. You can
That's
make
right.
more money, you can find another guy, but you can't get your time back.
That's right.
So when you say no to someone taking your time, whether that's work, friendships, otherwise, and every time we say no, or rather we say yes when we should have said no, we actually break promises to ourselves. And I've
Mhm.
fallen in love so much with myself, and I know it's very cliche to say, but I really do value me.
Yes.
And so when I say yes, but I mean no, I actually break my own trust. And I don't want to break my own trust, because if I break my own trust, there's a saying out there that is, a woman will accept the love she thinks she deserves.
Mhm.
And I think that's the friendships we deserve, that's the business partners we deserve, that's the opportunities we deserve. So
Yep.
I don't want to cheapen me. I don't want to break trust with me, because then everybody else will be a little bit, will also continue to cheapen me and break my trust. So
Mhm.
it started with me. So when I said, I don't want to go out with you, friend, to have drinks on a patio, I don't want to do that. No, the answer is no. Thank you, but no.
Mhm.
I actually felt empowered, and it was easier to then, do I really want to hang out with this gentleman? No. And that's what was surprising to me, is how many relationships I was in, friendships and romantic relationships, because I was filling a void, but I didn't actually like them,
Mm.
which is on me to be like, I didn't actually like you. We didn't share core values. You didn't, you had narcissistic traits. You know what I mean? Like, you weren't working on
Right.
you.
Mhm.
And I still chose to have you as one of my five. And unfortunately, those things of who you are matter. I've gone so far as to figure out that I also have to know who my friends are,
Mhm.
because I've noticed that if I'm friends with somebody and they're friends with somebody I would not be friends with at all, based on how they're choosing to live their life in the moment,
Mhm.
um, that will bleed into the friendship.
It does. Yeah.
And it's been a powerful place for me to say, hey, I really respect you. I love that we hang out. However, I've been really careful about my core values right now, and you're currently friends with somebody that I wouldn't be friends with. Um, so I need to spend less time with you. Usually people are shocked, or they come back and say, I've actually been thinking about that they, they have this habit, they do this thing, they
Mm.
have this impression of women. This just recently happened in my world. And I also don't agree with you, and I've been feeling uncomfortable about it. And maybe I'll talk to them about it. But if not, maybe I do need to put some space there. Again, we're not trying to judge people, but we have to be careful to protect our energy. We have to protect our time. And that's where it starts. If we will put up with that one person that we really don't like, but we're going to do it because we're trying to be a nice person and not offend them, you're setting yourself up silently to continue to be taken advantage of. So no happened for me when I realized I didn't want to break integrity with myself anymore.
Mm.
I just didn't want to, because it has this trickle down effect that I won't necessarily see immediately. It might be a year from now, and then
Right.
I'm hanging out with this person in another place that I don't want to, but I already said yes here, and I said yes here, and I said yes here, and I said yes here, and you wear yourself down. And so no becomes, it's still not easy to say.
Yeah.
I'm a
It's
people pleaser. So I actually wrote out different things I could say to say no. And I've learned to give myself the gift of time. If someone says, I want to do this, and I think, let me get back to you. So I have some time to think about it. And I've
that's
also found the
true.
courage to, when I realize I've said yes to something and I go, this is wrong. I'm anxious. It doesn't feel good. I don't want to go. I have
Mm.
some tells when I'm out of integrity with myself. I'm late for things. I'm angry. I get, a little anxious. I forget things. And then I go, okay, I'm out of integrity. Where am I out of integrity? It might have been 2 or 3 days ago. I said yes to doing something that I didn't really want to do, that I did out of
Right.
obligation. And then I have to call that person up and say, I actually got to say no. And believe me, there are some really amazing people I've had to say to readjust and say, I need to renegotiate what I agreed to. And they will have the balls, so you can tell who I'm talking about, to say, well, now I'm wounded. I'm like, well, that's your issue. It's not mine.
So you,
I go ahead.
so yeah, I mean, like, no is such a, like you say, such a powerful word, and it's um there's something that I recently saw, and it says when you say no, like that should be, it's like there's a price to whenever you're saying no. Like, so if you're saying no to something, you also, like, or if you, yeah, if you say yes all the time to things, you know that something has to fall off that, like,
Yes.
on your list, like no
Yep.
matter what you do. So if you
Yep.
say, if you have the courage to say no, and I think it's like there's some kind of price to pay for that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you may lose friends, you may lose relationship, you may
Mm-hmm.
lose whatever it is, but
Mm-hmm.
you also do gain in the process. And that's what I'm
Yep.
hearing you say, is that everybody, it's not going to agree with that no that you say.
And they might guilt you into whatever. But then
Yeah,
honestly, if somebody comes back, like this person I
yeah,
recently was chatting with, it was an immediate like, and this is why I said no. I didn't know why I needed to say no. I don't know why it made me uncomfortable, but I do now because I just said, here's my boundary. I'm uncomfortable. And you are now using guilt and
okay,
shame
yeah,
to manipulate me to do what's good for you rather than saying, okay, I respect that.
hmm,
uh Powerful for them to respond would be, I'm feeling a little bit disrespected by that. You made an agreement and somebody honoring their
right,
word is important. And then I
yeah,
can come back and say, yes, I'm sorry, I really appreciate your understanding. Because
that's right.
just because they're uncomfortable doesn't mean that I need to. And here's something: never negotiate with you. You
Hmm.
negotiate with other people to get what you want, but you do not negotiate with you. Because the second you do that, you are crossing your boundaries and you're breaking trust with yourself. And honestly, we've been doing this for so long, we don't even know where and how we're doing it.
Yeah, and people do take notice sometimes, because if they know you're a person
Yes.
who has a very strong core value, and
Mm-hmm.
you have a saying the integrity about you, and then you kind of like slack a little bit and you let something kind of go on, and they see that, and then it's like, well, you know what?
Mm-hmm.
She's not what she said she was. Like, she
Yes.
doesn't really have a firm foundation. She's easily
And
manipulated,
seriously,
easily. Yeah.
I would rather lose the respect of somebody else who doesn't understand my core values, or that I put my feelings first and I'm not willing to make myself uncomfortable to make someone
Hmm.
else comfortable,
Yeah.
than lose my own respect. I did
Yeah.
that for years. I did that for years. Not gonna do it
Yeah.
anymore.
So, I mean, talking about like having the ability to say no, and how
Mm,
important and crucial that is, and that's part of setting boundaries. You know,
yes.
no is a huge part of that. And there's many ways you can say no without being
Hmm.
disrespectful, and I think that's what you have to be considerate also sometimes
Yes.
too, depending on the
Yes.
situation.
It is not, for you to be a bitch, but it is for you to know and to speak. Yeah.
Yeah. So how can we empower or encourage women to speak openly about maybe subtle abuse? I think we want to talk about that too,
Mm,
because
yeah.
abuse sometimes it's not going to be something that you can really pinpoint right
Yes.
away. It's sometimes it comes in very subtle. How can you encourage them to be more empowered, and when it occurs in the relationships, to kind of start
Mm,
to, know, okay, this is something, this is a sign here. I need to be aware of that.
yeah. Well, first and foremost, my apologies, because it's not easy. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
ladies. So if you're listening and it sounds great to be living in this kind of freedom, there were years where it was really hard, and the renegotiation with other people, and people learn
Mm-hmm.
how to treat you. So once you start to renegotiate those relationships and boundaries, it isn't easy.
Mm-hmm.
And gossip and guilt is the language of the world. So it'll be subtle. It can come from people. So I'm thinking recently in my life, there's somebody who's connected intimately to somebody I'm connected with intimately.
Mm-hmm.
And I was making a different decision than they would have preferred. And so they spoke to the person close to me and
Mm-hmm.
said, well, we are worried about Candice.
Yeah.
So that was a subtle of moving their fear onto my person, who then transferred it over to me. And I said, why are they guilting me
Mm-hmm.
into making a different decision? And this person I said that to was like, well, no, they're just worried about you. I'm like, anytime you hear the word just, there's a justification for an action. And
Mm-hmm.
that is a subtle, well meaning, but subtle application of guilt to manipulate me to make a different decision. But it's common, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
it seems like I'm splitting hairs, but I'm like, no, 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 no. The empowered thing to do would have been to pick up the phone and call me and say, I'm feeling fear. So they are claiming the feeling that they're feeling. I'm claiming fear in the decision that you're making. And that would
Mm-hmm.
allow me to stand in my power and say, I hear you. I'm sorry you're feeling that way. Here's the reasons why I'm making that decision. So rather than subtly applying guilt in a way that's very culturally
Mm-hmm.
respected to manipulate me into making a different decision and making me the bad guy because now I'm making them worry. No, 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 no.
Mm-hmm.
They are in control of their emotions.
Yes.
They are choosing to worry. That's on them,
Right.
not on me.
Right. It's like
And
shifting,
yes,
sometimes it's hard to feel like, because we feel like we're shifting the blame, but it's mostly just communicating, seeing where everybody
yes,
is, because that
yes,
person may be also using their own core value to their advantage and making sure they are trying to use their own boundary, make sure that
yep,
people are not going more than they need to, and they're trying to make sure that we're all kind of
yes.
have our own
So in answer to your question, I think any of us, when we would have heard that guilt, you would have felt it in here, but you likely would have responded from a place of shame.
yeah.
And so I would encourage the people who are wanting to make this change is start to pay attention to that. Even if you
Mm-hmm.
don't respond as powerfully as I did,
Yeah.
pay attention to it and
Yeah.
begin to imagine what it could be, what it might be if you did something different. That's how subtle it is.
Yeah.
Now, it's taken me a long time to see that. Even the other day when my partner was passive aggressive and what he said about the dishes, and I said, why are we being passive aggressive? What did I miss? And I don't say it in a way to make him feel bad. I'm calling it out. And then
Mm-hmm.
he's like, I'm sorry, I'm feeling frustrated. I'm like, awesome. What are we frustrated about? Does that make sense? You can
Mm-hmm.
start to move your relationships to a much bigger place. But ladies, it's going to require that you take some responsibility for your emotions, right? Just like
Mm-hmm.
when I was triggered the other day, that was not his fault, even though he did the activity. I am triggered.
Yes.
But it's a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful opportunity for me to say, wow, I'm still not healed here.
Mm. Yeah, it's the work continues, right? Every time
Yes.
we have to continue
Yes.
working on ourselves. And
Yeah.
I think abuse in any type of form, it can leave
Mm,
a lot of betrayal, right?
mm-hmm.
And I think experience is such one of the biggest teachers in life.
Yes.
And with betrayal comes a lot of headaches. And so coming from personal experience,
Mm,
once we've been broken, down pretty much down to the core from
mm-hmm.
abuse
Mm-hmm.
and from betrayal and all of that stuff. I feel
Mm.
like it could be very difficult to rebuild trust,
Yes.
to
Yes.
especially trust in ourselves, to know that what we have to say and what we need to do
Yes.
is to be trustworthy, even though we have made a mistake in the past, right?
Oh,
And then
yeah.
trust ourselves. How were you able to rebuild your self-trust again after the betrayal?
This is such a good question. So I can remember I had left a relationship. So this was a few years after,
Mm-hmm.
I'd gotten out of the relationship and I had gotten through suicide and all this kind of stuff. So I'm a few years back now. I'm doing some work, but I'm still a work in progress for sure. I don't know if I've actually told any therapist yet what actually happened because I still haven't been able to give it voice. Okay.
Yes.
Um, and I was sitting in a bar because I was upset because I'd just been left by a boyfriend who I'd found out he had cheated on me multiple times.
Mm.
And I said to the woman I was, drinking buddies with, and she said to me, I said, I've lost trust in men. And she's like, no, you haven't lost trust in men. I said, no, you're right. I've lost trust in women. Women should not have crossed that line. And she said, no, you haven't lost trust in women. And I was like, what? And she's
Mm.
like, you lost trust in you. Because she said somewhere deep down inside, you knew he was bad news. There was some kind of thing you missed. There was something. And even if there wasn't, you chose him. And so you're blaming yourself for that. So this journey that you're going to go on as you heal from this relationship is not about learning to trust women or men. It's about
Mm,
learning to trust you again. And I remember thinking, darn it, she's right.
mm,
I was. And it's taken me a long time. And I think it goes back to that whole knowing your values. So I would suggest for ladies, um, do a values exercise. You can just Google that. I mean, there's tons of them out there, but you can just Google like values exercise. They will give you pages of different words. I went so far as to look them up. So first I went through, through them all and crossed off the ones that I didn't align with and circled the other ones. You're going to
mhm,
have way too many. Then I went through and sort of rated them and realized, okay, this one kind of sounds like this one. And I looked up in a dictionary what the words meant and picked the one I liked better. Anyway, I got it down to 10. And
mhm,
then from those 10, there's a couple that I know are my top 2 or 3. Starting to get to know me was really, really, really important because I couldn't make decisions because I'd never done a values exercise. I'm like, it's funny. I learned algebra in school. I learned science. I learned
mhm,
chemistry. But did I ever learn how to distinguish my own values? Nope,
mm,
certainly didn't. We give ourselves so much grief for not knowing how to set good boundaries or knowing how to have a loving, healthy relationship. But let's be honest, whenever, ever
mhm,
did you take a course, even one,
mm,
on how to set good boundaries, on how to ask the right questions before you get in a relationship, how to, like, we are not taught this stuff. And as a society, that's a problem. And so one of the reasons I'm homeschooling my children is because I want to have these emotional conversations with them to say,
mhm,
I'm going to teach you how to love. That's something we're not taught. And so then we become teenagers and we become young adults, and then we keep trying and we fail in relationships. Then we blame ourselves, and then we don't trust ourselves. And this is an awful pattern. So, ladies,
yeah.
you got to start with you,
Mhm,
period. There are tons of books, there are tons of things. I mean, girl, wash your face, what you name it. Or if you don't have the money, go to YouTube. There are so many people
mhm,
talking about different things
yeah.
to empower you to figure out the no. And so I would say, do that. Start there. I love it.
That's such a great advice because like what you say, the informations are out there. We just gotta look for it. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously not everything you're gonna see or read is gonna apply to you, but you can still people have so many knowledge, and because we all have been through different experiences and people
Mm-hmm.
have been able to take the time to write down those lessons from their experiences that
Yeah.
could be teaching us a lot in life.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to know also, like, with once you've been through all this experience and coming back up to the top, and you use different techniques,
Mm-hmm.
reading, seeking out knowledge about the specific topics that applies to your situation,
Mm-hmm.
working with a therapist to get you to where you need to be. We can
Mm-hmm.
never be, we can't ever be like whole 100%, but we can have the tools
Mm-hmm.
that we need to help us regulate some of those triggers and things that we're going to experience in life.
Mm-hmm.
So what led you to then creating this podcast, I believe it's called the Ripple, right?
Yeah, create the Ripple podcast. Yeah, and the tagline is "Trust the niggle, tell the truth." And that, of course, like I share with you, is that it's that annoying feeling. So I'm kind of on a mission to help women for sure,
Mm-hmm.
people, but women,
Yeah.
especially young women,
Mm-hmm.
to listen to that and to tell them that sense of that discernment, like you talked about, that feeling. You're not
Mm-hmm.
going to necessarily, and probably won't have any sort of logical basis for that feeling, but you need to trust it. Even if
Mm-hmm.
you discover I was off base, it was just a superstition, it was something that had happened in the past. And so I'm bringing that trigger and that trauma forward. You give yourself the gift of time to really think about that. And so I realized that I'd spent 20 years hiding in the shadows. People would often say that I wasn't trustworthy. And I wasn't, because I wasn't being truthful with myself about what had happened. And that subtle step out of integrity and lack of trust in myself
Mm-hmm.
was communicated on a subconscious level. And so I wasn't able to be free. I wasn't able to be me. I didn't know how to have good relationships. Like, I would always end up self sabotaging. And so some of these patterns kept on coming. And unfortunately, I can't keep blaming everybody else. I, at some point, I have to say, the problem is me, clearly me. I
Yeah.
need to do the work. I need to look it in the eye And so now when people say, oh yeah, but you should do this, I'm like, oh yes, but that was before I did the healing work. And so I was, late for meetings all the time because I was saying yes to meetings and people I didn't want to hang out with. And
Mm,
then I let it linger because they're like, oh, you were late for me. And I'm going, yes, I appreciate you. You're not my people.
mm,
And some people have given me grief for that. And I'm like, but here's the deal. I don't necessarily know that I want to have all of the friends that I had when I was 12, when
mhm,
I'm 16, when I'm 21, when I'm 40, because we grow, we change, we expand. It doesn't mean I think they're bad people. It doesn't mean I think any of those things. It
mhm,
just means that as I'm growing and maturing, I'm looking for people who are my people. They're my tribe. They're going to hang out with me. Reason, season, lifetime. There's very few lifetime people in your world, really. There's reason, growth, etc., job, you name it. There's seasoned people that come in to teach you something. And so I'm really becoming respectful about that. And I started to look at people's lives and go, do you have a great marriage? Great. We should be friends.
mhm,
Are you focused on your personal development? Yep. Are you focused on, like this sort of thing? And so I started the podcast because I want to be one of those women like yourself who are out there telling the truth.
mm,
And people say, well, it's kind of like your truth. And I said, it's the truth according to me. And I'm hoping that as I share from a place of integrity for me, that somebody else listening goes, I can start living in integrity. Because honestly, ladies, the feeling of relief, the anxiety lessens, it's a beautiful place to be in, regardless of whether it becomes a top podcast. If I just help one other person to tell the truth and renegotiate something in her relationship so she has a better marriage, better life, a better friendship, she finally confronts that narcissistic friend, whatever it is, that's that's the job right there.
yeah. And we all have a story to tell. We all have,
Mhm.
and I believe that story is a story of you.
Mhm.
A lot of it it's written by us for us, and it's just depends. Those that come along with and read our story or hear of our truth, they may gain something from it. They may not, but it's on us as individual persons to
Yeah.
start to write our own stories, and that's
Yeah.
through a story of you, and that's speaking of your truth, speaking of your story, and that
Mhm.
there's power in truth, when we
There
speak of
is.
it. And I think you are doing a phenomenal job with the
Thank you.
podcast and just being able to highlight your own story, but giving other people the platform, because it's not
Thank
just
you.
about us. Once we've been through
No.
things,
Yeah.
most of the thing what we do after that, once we get
Yeah.
to the growth part of our lives, we try
Mhm.
to then help other people grow also through our
Yeah.
own story. So that's
It's
wonderful.
important for me too that when someone listens to the show that they walk away with something that's tangible, right? I want them to
Mhm.
walk away and go, I can start doing this in my life and that will lead me closer. Because I think my healing journey was certainly, bits and pieces from therapists and people and like, people that spoke into my life throughout the way that have had an
Yeah,
impact.
yeah.
And I mean, that woman at the bar, I don't know if what she said, if she had any idea the impact of what
Mm.
she said, but it's had a
Mhm.
huge impact. So
Yeah.
yeah, we never know
Who's
when that's
listening?
going to help. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so real
Yeah.
quick here, just before we wind up our
Mhm.
interview, so there's a new thing we do at the show here at Laugh.
Mhm.
So what it is where I ask three questions, and you
Fun.
answer them in the
Ready.
best you can. So and so the first question I have is, how did you find and connect to your voice?
I think the number one way I did that was journaling because it
Mm,
took me a really long time to speak.
yes.
Um, but and I would often fight with people on text message and they'd be like, how come you can say all this stuff, but you can't speak? And I said, I don't know, it took me years to feel comfortable to do
Mm.
that. So journaling was a way that I was able to be honest. And even if I ripped the page out and threw it away or burned it right away, it was the one place where I could be honest with me.
That's very cool. I think everybody should have a journal
Yeah.
and or even a space to
Yeah.
release some of the emotions that we carry so on all the time and for
Hmm.
lifetime. So that's great
Hmm.
that writing has been a healing journey as
Huge.
well. So that's wonderful. Second question: what are you most proud of now? During this journey in your life.
My children. Um, I have a 7-year-old who is just the light of my life, and I want to raise her in a way that she's empowered to speak up in a way that I never felt able to do so. And I feel great knowing that I'm sort of walking forward without being wounded and hiding things from her. And then I have a little boy who's 6 months old, 7 months old. And I'm excited to raise up a young man who knows the difference between right and wrong and consent and all these different things that I think are important.
Mhm.
And more than that, I feel like I'm a healthy, grounded parent who's very committed to her personal development. And so I'm raising up children, I think, who are going to be emotionally intelligent and who can communicate their needs effectively. And the funny thing about communicating your needs effectively, like your needs, um, that has an impact on other people. And so I'm most proud of that for sure. And she's gone.
Sorry about that. I'm still
No
here.
worries.
Yeah,
You're a
so
mom. I love it. That's my
the
favorite. I'm surprised I got left alone this long. So it's
well, the
wonderful.
the last question that I wanted to cover was, what's one life lessons? I'm sure you have a lot of many of
Mm,
them, and you spoke a lot about some of those lessons today.
mhm, mhm.
But what would you say is your top life lessons that you have learned along your journey so far?
Well, trust the niggle, tell the truth. That's first and
Yeah,
foremost.
yeah.
Love yourself, take care of yourself, and like really beyond, the bubble bath kind of a thing. Like have some courage to speak up for yourself. You are your best advocate. And unfortunately, I've often wanted, Prince Charming to ride in and be my advocate.
Yes.
And he's he doesn't exist, ladies, right? You got to rescue
Yeah.
yourself first, and then you meet amazing people who back you up. Um,
That's so
and
true.
I've found a lot of joy and peace and strength when I stopped waiting for someone to rescue me. And I said, girl, you got to slay your own dragon and you got to
Mm,
rescue yourself. And
mm,
then along the way, I met amazing people, men and women who got on side with that, supported me. And, in the relationship I'm in now, it took courage. So I would encourage a woman who wants to make a difference. What we're talking about here today takes courage. It takes
yes.
courage to leave unhealthy relationships and set new boundaries, but it's not going to be nearly as hard as living what you're living now. Because right
Mm,
now, you are living out of integrity with yourself. And I know intimately the pain of that. The other side, even though it's work and it takes courage and it's scary and you're going to fail, it's not nearly as hard, I don't think,
mm,
because you're at least you're living in integrity with yourself. And that has always felt like the bigger blessing. And so I would say, have the courage to have
mhm.
conversations that matter, but start them with you first.
It all starts with the self, right? Oh, that's wonderful. I mean, you've been so vulnerable. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Candice, for sharing all of
Mhm.
your insights and your life lessons. And, I think it doesn't take an expert to express and share their own
I agree.
story and the truth, and I
Hmm.
think we all have those stories. We all have those things that happen to
Hmm.
us, but it's what we do with them that makes the biggest impact, right?
Yeah,
So tell us a little bit about how our listeners can listen to your amazing podcast and all the things
for
you're
sure.
doing.
You guys can head over to the website, which is just CandiceSmiley.com. That's my first and last name, so easy peasy. And then I've got a podcast archive there, so you can listen to past stuff.
Mhm.
We actually do take guest shows like ones like this, and we make sure we post it on the page because connection and collaboration are really important for me. So people can listen there or anywhere you would normally stream your podcast, and it's just Create the Ripple podcast. And you can see all, I think we've got 69 episodes now, heading up to the 70th one. So lots,
Wonderful.
lots of amazing stuff there.
Yeah, some great content, guys. So, yeah, thank you all for coming and for listening to the
Hmm.
show. And thank you so much for coming, Candice. And we are
Hmm.
looking forward to our next episode with you guys.
Thank you.
And as always, continue lifting your voice and continue try to find out how you can help other people live their voice. If it's just creating the space for them to be able to speak their truth, and also in that process, you'll be able to connect to your own voice as well. Thank you, guys.